The Southern African Development Community will hold an extraordinary summit of heads of state and government of the region in Mozambique's capital, Maputo, on June 23rd, tomorrow. The meeting will discuss issues of regional integration, cooperation, and development. The meeting will be led by Mozambique's President Filipe Nyusi, who is also the chair of the regional bloc. The agenda includes the regional response and support to Mozambique in addressing terrorism, food security, health, and overall development. Mozambique has witnessed an uprising of terrorist groups which forced French oil giant Total to declare force majeure and pull out of a $20 billion liquefied natural gas project. This was the largest private investment in Africa. Mozambique's misfortune is the latest and largest addition to the ballooning economic cost of terrorism in Africa, which rose more than tenfold from $1.54 billion in 2007 to $15.5 billion in 2016. Why has regional intervention been difficult for SADC? What's the economic future of the region with instability in Mozambique? Today, our focus is on the Southern African Development Community Summit 2021 with Mozambique at its center. I'm Tolulope, Adeleru-Balogun. Welcome. This is Business Edge. Joining me from Johannesburg, South Africa is Ekos Akpokabayen. He's the Chief Investment Officer of Ovid Capita. Ekos, it's a pleasure to have you once again. Thank you for joining us on Business Edge.
Good morning, Tolu.
Good morning. It's very likely that we're going to see conversations concerning Mozambique's well-being, both the security and economic well-being, dominate the conversations at the SADC meeting. And since the attacks in the gas hub of Palma, we've seen a number of interesting things come to light. So the president held bilateral meetings with several international leaders to seek assistance. Earlier this month, he also met with the president of the European Council. He met with President Paul Kagame ahead of the last summit, as well as France's Emmanuel Macron. But we've seen a number of things also happen. Proposed intervention by Rwanda was rejected by SADC members. So what has SADC done for Mozambique in the intervening months since this particular terrorist insurgency has risen up?
In April, there were a few presidents that met the Mozambican president in April to discuss about the security situation, also led by the South African president. And there was no true conclusion, and that meeting was postponed till about 3 weeks' time. But no further meeting took place, and they wanted to discuss more on the bigger SADC representation. If you check, since last year, there's been a lot of condemnation on SADC being silent on issues concerning the regions, especially political issues. But this is a very critical issue on this region. I think this is the only time we're seeing this kind of attacks on this kind of scale, and it's quite troubling. Mm-hmm. Yes, the president can be meeting with foreign leaders, but what is important is to tackle the issues on the ground. And one of the biggest issues that has led to the problem in northern Mozambique is the mismanagement and the corruption that has been going on for years. There has to be reform in the country. There has to be a political will. And I don't see much that will come out from SADC meeting interfering in regional crises like this.
Wow. So we know that SADC members are also looking to South Africa. They're looking to President Cyril Ramaphosa to sort of lead the way on this. But he has a lot of things on his plate right now at the home front. High unemployment in South Africa, particularly COVID-19, a third wave there, and some interesting new increased restrictions as well. So many don't think that the president of South Africa really has the capacity, the space right now to also lead the charge with Mozambique. What do you feel about that? Do you think, you've just said it now, that you don't really see SADC's intervention leading the way in this? So where do we then go for Mozambique? This has to be fully internal, in your opinion?
I think South Africa is a big brother in this region. If you look at the economic participation, the combined GDP, South Africa is over 60%. The largest economy in this region, and the big brother driving things. And within the intervention, in April, the meeting led by South African president. I think South Africa has no choice. We've seen in the past what happened and how it affected South Africa's unemployment drive and insecurity in South Africa, and helped to cause the economic situation in South Africa. So many quarters have called that, South Africa cannot, even if it has its own problems, South Africa cannot ignore the problems going on in Mozambique currently, because it can spiral out of control. We can see already there's over 600 people displaced from northern Mozambique already. And if that continues and go to other regions in the country, and there's refugees influx into South Africa, that would be a much bigger problem for South Africa. South Africa has no choice. It's the big brother. It has to find ways to intervene. And I'm sure Cyril Ramaphosa will be doing that, I'm sure, behind the scenes.
All right, so let's take a trip down memory lane before we get into some other issues here. And as you mentioned, you believe this is down to mismanagement and political issues internally within Mozambique. But Mozambique is like many other African countries. It has gone through a civil war and is trying to pick up the pieces after that. So the economy of Mozambique is said to have developed after the civil war. We saw the government embark on a series of macroeconomic reforms after the war. There was donor assistance as well. There were multi-party elections in 1994, which gave it some semblance of political stability. We also see there was dramatic improvements in the country's growth rate. Inflation was in the single digits in the late 1990s, but did return to double digits in the early 2000s. There were fiscal reforms. VAT was introduced. There was also reforms in the customs service, even though the government still continues to be dependent largely on foreign aid to fund its budget. Before this uprising came, that's particularly tied to this LNG project, what were the economic prospects for Mozambique?
Mozambique was rightly placed. Many of its seaport is being used by most of the country going up to the EU bloc, like Zimbabwe, Zambia. It had benefited so much with its roots and its engagement with Tanzania as well. And so the prospect where Mozambique has been placed has been a very good location in terms of assisting its. But since, things started spurring down, yes, your maths and your figures are right at that time. Since the death of Michel Samora, things started going down politically, and it was a matter of time. And if you look at the trajectory and the infighting politically and nepotism has been a big problem. It has been a big problem in Mozambique, affecting different organizations to come together to share the resources. Since the discovery of the gas reserve in northern Mozambique and the awareness and the poverty in that area, you can see how it has brought in rebels over the years. And now we are seeing that ISIS are taking advantage to come to that region to destabilize it. Of course, you mentioned the losing of a big $20 billion deal. Mm-hmm. You see how far this can go. So obviously, Mozambique, needs to get its act together.
Yeah. I think it's important to know when we have conversations like this and situations like the one in Mozambique, that there's also an economic side to the terrorist attacks that Palma and the northern region of Cabo Delgado are actually experiencing. This is not just rebels or terrorists coming in and saying because we think it's the West that we don't want them. There's an economic side to this. They want to control the project. They want to control the gas and sell it on the black market. How many people are really taking cognizance of the fact that there's an economic side to the terrorist activity that's happening in this region of Mozambique?
That's the biggest problem. And there's been tribalism and there's been mismanagement and putting people away from the resources and government in control in Mozambique over the years. And there's been crises even the 90s going on to the early 2000s. And since 2017, it's spreading out of control. Of course, we know that recently the US government, it was in March, they've sent forces to train Mozambican military to help to fight. They've termed, those groups agitating. They've termed them terrorist groups. And we're seeing more intervention, but of course we know why. It's because of the economic implication. There's a huge, huge opportunity, economic implication in that region, but the people there are not benefiting, and that's why we're seeing these rebels inviting terrorists and other groups to fight for the resources.
All right, Ekos, let's hold on. When we come back from this break, we'll get into the force majeure that Total has declared concerning that $20 billion project. Again, I have to emphasize, the largest private investment in Africa is on hold indefinitely because of insecurity. We'll be right back. This is Business Edge, and we are talking about the SADC summit, the Southern African Development Community, I beg your pardon, summit that will be holding this week. And top of the agenda is the situation in Mozambique. My guest is joining us from Johannesburg, South Africa, as we take a look at what this means for Mozambique and the region. Now, Ekos, we've seen international aid start to come in, and unfortunately, Mozambique has received international aid throughout the years. U.S. aid has provided about $30 million to address food security. The World Bank also approved about $150 million recently, targeting specifically the restive northern region of Mozambique. What do you think all of this money coming in, and possibly some more from other international donors, will do for Mozambique?
Look, let me just first explain to you and tell you something. When I speak about the corruption in Mozambique, I'll tell you on the Transparency International gave Mozambique a score out of 186 countries, they're about 146. So they're a very highly corrupt country. And Mozambique has been relying on aid. And for us, we know that aid has not really ever worked anywhere. I called Peter Pollock, and he did a study for over 30 years, and aid had never worked anywhere in the world. And when you follow Eunice, who's the founder of Greening Bank, he did an experiment where he gave the poorest of the poor, money to start business as a loan, and they all succeeded. So we know aid is just a joke. I'll give you some of what one of my friends told me. They took a martial art team to the United Kingdom and for competition. And the African team, you know what the English people did? They put a big in front of the African team where the dormitories were. And they put McDonald's and food that were not healthy for them. And what did the Africans do? They kept eating the food, they got fat, and on the day of the competition, they were all disqualified. That's what aid does to us. You know, you put the aid there, and so we do not look at the opportunity, how we can grow ourselves. We keep looking at the aid and fighting for it because we think it's easy dollars. And it doesn't really develop us. So I'm not really, when people want to give you money, sometimes it's hard to say no, but you must open your eyes properly. Aid has not worked. I don't see a case where aid will work. We need investment. We need them to come and build industries, come and invest in these places. So when there are things like this, it will not just be talk all the way. Countries, we want to protect their investment. So we need the Europeans to come and invest in this country, in this continent, and not just throwing packet of aids and these figures you're calling. For we see they're nothing.
So now let's talk about that investment. So the largest private, I just think this emphasis is important. The largest private investment on the continent, $20 billion for the development of a liquefied natural gas project in Mozambique. Now it's suspended indefinitely because of the security situation. Mozambique was projecting about $100 billion revenue over the next 25 years, which would have put them on the way to being able to say, you know what, your aid, take it and keep it. But that's not going to happen now. We're not sure how long this situation is going to last. But let's look at this in terms of the business investment that Total was prepared and has been putting in some regards. What were the factors, what were the things that Total looked at in arriving at this decision for the force majeure?
Mozambique, of course, had one of the largest gas reserves in that region, in northern Mozambique, and it was a great opportunity. There have been several meetings. In fact, Total wrote some presence, and there's been complaint. It's been operational, but they were going on a larger scale to bring in this deal into reality, and it's long coming. But I think it's coming at a time where the insecurity has been large. I don't know if there's a link between security and this deal. But there's cries on who's going to really benefit apart from the economy. because of the level of corruption and how money is going to private companies and not benefiting the people on the ground. That has also triggered the insecurity in the country. But this was a good, we really feel bad this kind of investment is being held up indefinitely. And I'm sure this is going to be on the table of SADC. But if this kind of investment is what is going to create attention to the corruption and security in Mozambique, then so be it.
How much breathing room does this force majeure give Total in terms of its own investors, in terms of the project? What does it do for the French energy giant as everybody's watching to see how this situation in Mozambique plays out?
Look, with the force majeure, it's a very difficult situation because right now is a political instability and insecurity in the region. Of course, when you have this kind of deals, you have an insurance company that back you up in case this kind of things happen. And they've not put a date, they say it is indefinite. So I'm sure, there will be pressure to tackle this security situation. But my guess is that, using heavy force and not, calling some of these rebels to the table to dialogue and discuss, would just be, wasting time. I think there should be dialogue. You never end these things by the sounds of the gun.
Very true. So let's look at something interesting that developed here. So while we know that Total is putting its project in Mozambique on hold, we've seen that this situation has sort of renewed the momentum for Mozambique's neighbor, Tanzania. Tanzania is in conversations with people like Eni in terms of also developing their gas and resources. So now there's a race in this particular region of the continent to develop resources, these natural gas and liquefied natural gas resources before the global campaign. We understand that the world is moving away from fossil fuels. These are countries that have these fossil fuels in abundance and they want to make the most use of it. What moves are we seeing from Tanzania right now, which is, as a neighbor to Mozambique, as a member of SADC, also has to position herself to also take advantage, unfortunately, of the situation that is happening in Mozambique? What's happening with Tanzania in regards to this?
Tanzania has been quite politically stable. They just lost the president with COVID earlier this year. And the vice president took over. She's been doing a good job. She's been watched. And the former president set a good blueprint, although he has enemies in few quarters because of the hard stance he took with the economy and reforming Mozambique. The infrastructure has really developed. I think Tanzania doesn't have a choice. It has to continue to try to do a business, and it will take opportunity when this kind of opportunity comes its way. But it will be limited because it doesn't have the waterways and the seas and some of the kind of reserve we see in Mozambique. But I think Tanzania will continue to do what it's been doing, and they've been doing a great job.
One of the things that's also coming up at the summit is that they want to look back at 40 years of the Southern Africa Development Community. They want to look at their ability to foster peace and regional integration and development. If you're to give them, I know it's difficult sometimes to often score these kind of situations. So I'll just ask you, what do you think has been the positives that the Southern African Development Community has brought to the region? 40 years is a long time. We have Ekos, we have the community in Eastern Africa, we have the AU. But oftentimes when you look at some of these blocks, many people wonder if they've actually achieved what they set out to achieve. So in terms of SADC, what do you think?
Look, when we talk about the forming of SADC, we have to pay respect to Kenneth Kaunda, who just passed last week. He was one of the founding fathers that pushed for this, even if Zambia is not part of that SADC. Just to remind ourselves to pay tribute to him, Kenneth Kaunda, the late Kenneth Kaunda. But if you look to give kudos to SADC region, at the time it was formed in 1980, most of the countries within the region never had their independence and there was no democracy. They were all oppressed. And so within that time, there's been a lot of transformation within the region. A lot of these countries, right all the way from Namibia, South Africa, Mozambique, we talk about Tanzania, they all gained their independence. And that's a big achievement, not to take for granted. And there's been relatively a lot of stability The other countries that have been, instability in the region, apart from recently we are seeing this kind of level of insecurity in Mozambique. It's just been in the DRC, but it's not been at that scale where there was so much worry. It's just been in the DRC. And when you look at Zimbabwe, it was just mainly political. It was on the scale we are seeing. So SADC has really region quite peaceful, not like what we see in the East. And we can give kudos to them. And so when the essence of these regions, the target was to silence the gun. For many years, we've seen in Europe prosperity because there's no guns flying around. And if that can be achieved and political stability, there's no doubt economic development will be very, very quick and fast.
All right, so we are projecting ahead of the meeting. You said it earlier, but I want to be sure that you stand by your stance regarding what can come out of the meeting that's coming this week. Do you think there really is going to be the decision to intervene in Mozambique, to offer aid to Mozambique? What do you think will come from the meeting?
Look, the reason why I'm worried about the meeting is because, when you see the body language, the president has this meeting and he wants to launch about 4 magazines. I mean, we're talking about huge prices and losing a $20 billion deal. I don't think there should be many things on the table. It should be security and food security and the COVID vaccines should be on the table. Other things should be out of the way. Right now, we need to get people back to work. There needs to be vaccines. There's been a lot of shortage within the region. I know the South African president has just secured the vaccine hub with the French president, which was announced yesterday. That's good news. And he's been trying to get waivers so there will be production within the continent. But there should be a lot of emphasis on getting people vaccinated and getting people back to work and looking at food security and the impact of COVID. And of course, the most important thing is the insecurity in the north of Mozambique, because we don't want that to spread. We've seen the impact. It's getting very brutal. People are being beheaded and the people are being displaced. So those are the things that should be focused on and should be discussed on. Every other thing, I don't think, carries the weight.
All right. Thank you so much, Ekos Akpokabayen, for joining me as usual. We'll be touching base with you after the summit to see what priority areas the leaders of the Southern African Development Community countries say they have decided to focus on. And just for your information, SADC has identified specific objectives that it wants to achieve: market integration, macroeconomic convergence, the strengthening of financial and capital markets, attainment of deeper monetary cooperation, increasing levels of investment, and enhanced SADC competitiveness. 40 years of the Southern African Development Community. Has it achieved its aim? We'll take a quick break right now. When we come back, we have NC4 to watch. Do stay with us. And as we wrap things up, let's give you a few stories we're keeping our eyes on. Africa is working with the European Union and other partners to create regional vaccine manufacturing hubs in South Africa, Senegal, and Rwanda, with Nigeria under consideration, according to the World Trade Organization Director General, Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala. Now, she adds that the regional production hubs, in tandem with open supply chains, offer a more promising path to preparedness for future health crisis. Number 2 on our list, a total of 17 manufacturers of electricity meters are demanding an increase in the cost of the commodity following the rise in inflation and foreign exchange rates, among other economic variables. They are blaming global increase in the prices of raw materials and components for the manufacturing of prepaid meters. Now, Nigeria's power sector is suffering from a huge metering gap, and closing this gap is expected to also improve revenue collection, transparency, payment discipline, as well as also improve customer satisfaction with the industry. South African consumers' spending power came under pressure in May as high food inflation showed no signs of abating, driven by high producer prices and low statistical base effects. Now, Statistics South Africa this week will release the Consumer Price Index and Producer Price Index data amid rising unemployment in the first quarter, despite encouraging economic performance. The CPI inflation is forecast to have accelerated to 5.2% year-on-year in May from 4.4% in April, affected by the statistical base comparison for last year's lockdown. And finally on our list, the Kenya Bankers Association, the Kenya Climate Innovation Center, and FSD Kenya have partnered to launch a blended finance project to finance small and medium-scale enterprises in the country. Now, blended finance is when funds are invested in sustainable development projects and the projects provide financial returns to investors. The partnership to finance SMEs in sustainable development is the first project of its kind in Kenya. And that's it on today's show. Thank you very much for joining me. You can head to our Facebook page, our YouTube channel. You can head to our website and our social media platforms at News Central TV if you've missed any of our conversations on economic and financial stories from across the continent. Don't forget that, of course, we are live on StarTimes Channel 274 and Apple TV Channel 23. And you can download our mobile app on App Store and Play Store so you can take us with you wherever you go. I'm Tolulope, Adeleru-Balogun. I'll see you next time.